interest around the country, to the states, and also to the commission. Let me just mention to our panelists, A, thank you for coming. B, we've had to slightly reshuffle at least the mode of the schedule here. We have Secretary Kobach, who will be talking about the Kansas project, and he was going to take a flight which was canceled, and so will now be participating by phone. But in order to make that work, we have to put him on the line at exactly 11:45. So we're going to have to move this along within the normal time frame, but maybe enforced, and a little more adhered to a little bit more strictly than normally we would. So I appreciate your cooperation and your understanding. We just have to accommodate the Secretary. So let us begin however you'd like to begin. Yeah. Maybe David Becker, would you like to open? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Bauer. Good morning, Commissioners. Very good to be with you here today. As I think most of you know, I'm David Becker. I'm the director of the Election Initiatives team at the Pew Charitable Trust, and it's very nice to be with you here today. Pew's been working with election officials and experts in this field to improve the administration of elections in this country for several years. After the 2008 presidential election, we invited over 200 experts, campaign operatives, media, state and local election officials from all over the country to a convening to look back at the election and look forward to possible areas of reform. Several of you were at that convening. We asked virtually everyone who participated if there was one area of election administration that was most important to focus on improving. And the response was virtually unanimous. Republicans, Democrats, election officials, and academics all agreed that voter registration was the one area most in need of repair. And the reason is pretty clear. Problems with voter lists can resonate throughout the elections process. It's not just a list problem. It's a problem that can result in actual difficulties on Election Day at the polls, provisional ballots, etc. Our system of voter registration dates back to the 19th century, still relying heavily on what I call the 3 Ps, paper, pen, and postal mail. Our research confirms that the result is a costly and inefficient system where approximately 24 million voter records are no longer up to date, where about 2 million dead people are still on the rolls, and where 51 million eligible citizens, about 1 in 4 eligible Americans, haven't gotten onto the voter lists at all. Our outdated voter registration system neither served the interests of election integrity nor provided convenient access for all eligible voters. So in 2009, Pew convened a working group of 42 experts, state and local election officials from over 20 states, academics, and experts in technology from the private sector to consider how best to bring our voter registration system into the 21st century. In 2011, we released the results of this effort in a report we entitled Upgrading Democracy. In that report, we made 3 major recommendations, all informed by this panel of experts. First, we worked with states to expand the implementation of online voter registration, which had been proven to improve the integrity of the rolls, significantly reduce costs, all while enhancing convenience for the voter. As a result, we went from 2 states offering online registration in 2008 to 13 states offering it in 2012. 14 states offer it today, with several others poised to implement online registration systems in the next year. Second, we recommended states automate their motor voter processes more, akin to systems that have generated great successes in states like Delaware and Michigan. And last, and the main reason I'm here to talk to you today, is we recommended states better share data to keep up with our mobile society, enabling the states to identify voters who'd moved and citizens who might not yet be registered in order to keep more accurate lists and better control the pace of voter registration so that all the voter registration activity isn't compressed into about the 30 to 60-day window right before a presidential election as it is today. Then Pew partnered with 7 pioneering states, Colorado, Delaware, Maryland, Nevada, Utah, Virginia, and Washington State, to build the Electronic Registration Information Center, or ERIC. ERIC is a sophisticated data center that provides participating states with an opportunity to better identify voters who move or die by securely comparing voter registration lists, motor vehicles data, and other data sources, such as Social Security death records and national change of address information. Using state-of-the-art software provided by IBM, ERIC gives states the actionable information needed to correct those records in a timely manner and reach out to eligible unregistered voters to encourage them to register at the most efficient time, weeks or months before an election, rather than right at the deadline. ERIC is a nonprofit corporation entirely run and funded by the participating states. With me today is the chair of the ERIC board, Shane Hamlin from Washington State, who can share more details about how ERIC works and the results we've seen so far.
Good morning, Co-Chair Bauer, Co-Chair Ginsburg, and members of the Commission. My name is Shane Hamlin. I am the chair of the Electronic Registration Information Center, or ERIC, and the Deputy Director of Elections for Washington State. Thank you for inviting me to speak today on ERIC and voter registration list maintenance. I'm going to cover 5 topics in my presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit about ERIC's mission and what ERIC does for states. I'm going to talk about Washington State's experience with ERIC, including a specific example with one of the reports we get from ERIC. I'm going to share a couple of benefits to states by participating in ERIC, some of which David's mentioned. I'll talk about a couple of others as well. I'm going to touch briefly on privacy and security, and then close by talking about the importance of looking at voter registration and what ERIC can do to help it. ERIC's mission is to assist states with improving the accuracy of America's voter rolls and to increase access to voter registration for all eligible citizens. Using powerful data matching technologies, ERIC provides more comprehensive and accurate information by analyzing voter registration information and driver information from participating states, and it also looks at Social Security death index and national change of address data. Using reports from ERIC, elections administrators can more confidently remove duplicate registrations, cancel registrations of deceased voters, better process address updates and address changes, and better manage and more efficiently manage records of voters who move and then register in another state. And they can do this and they can act on these ERIC reports and do this all in a manner that complies with federal laws that protect voter rights, but also require states to maintain clean rolls. ERIC also identifies, as David mentioned, residents in our state that are not registered but are eligible, giving states an opportunity to, giving states information to conduct targeted, more efficient voter registration outreach programs. So what's my state's experience? To understand my state's experience with ERIC, I want to start by giving you a couple of points to consider and put Washington in context with other states. We have 3.9 million registered voters. All of our elections are conducted by mail, so list maintenance is essential. And elections are conducted at the county level by 39 separately elected county auditors. A couple of weeks ago, we broke new ground in my state when we began updating 53,000 voter registration records and mailed voter registration information to a little over 140,000 unregistered but potentially eligible residents. And we could not have done either of those on this scale and this efficiently without participating in ERIC. Washington has a long history of conducting list maintenance activities like most states that comply with NVRA and HAVA. We do routine duplicate checks and deceased checks. We've participated in cross-state voter registration comparisons with Oregon and Alaska using off-the-shelf software, and we just joined the Kansas State Interstate Project. But given the technology available to us in ERIC, we know we can do a lot better. So how much better was ERIC matching than what we currently do? I'm going to give you an example using the deceased voter report we got from ERIC, our first report from ERIC on deceased voters. The new system identified 947 deceased voters that we had missed using our routine processes. That's 25% more records than we found in our process. And I think this demonstrates the real value of ERIC. We've used National Social Security Death Index for years. We use the same data as ERIC, but because it is more sophisticated and powerful than what we can do in our shop, it found 25% more records. That's 947 voters, deceased voters, those are ballots in my state that will not get mailed, and that is a huge improvement in our processes. What are some of the other benefits to states? ERIC states should see cleaner voter rolls, which means cost savings at elections time, the fewer problems at the polls, fewer provisional ballots cast, and that gets to some of the bigger issues that you are looking at in your work here. ERIC members will see cost savings through joint purchases of data services. By pooling resources as ERIC members, individual states will not have to purchase access to the Social Security Death Index or national change of address data. And as David talked about, that voter registration activity that occurs over a 48-month cycle and peaks at a presidential election voter registration deadline, over time we should see that activity spread across a more manageable period of time so that our local elections officials can more efficiently manage voter registrations and people are on the rolls in a timely manner. And finally, but perhaps less tangible, a benefit of participating in an ERIC is that it demonstrates to stakeholders, interest groups, campaigns, candidates, the media, and our legislators that we're doing everything we can to maintain accurate rolls and protect the integrity of our rolls, but also to reach out to ineligible residents and get them registered. So a comment on the data and security and privacy. Privacy and security were built into ERIC from the beginning. The ERIC work group asked the Center for Democracy and Technology to review the ERIC governance structure and technical design, and the Center's recommendations were incorporated into ERIC. ERIC member states retain control over their data. ERIC is not a national voter registration database. Sensitive data is anonymized, which means it's rendered unintelligible to humans. It's done twice, when it leaves the state and as it goes into ERIC. So sensitive data, you can't tell what it is on ERIC's end, and you can't tell in another state or if you got the data what it is. Data is sent in a secure manner to ERIC, and ERIC, the system, the program itself, the IBM software, is not accessible on the internet. And like I said, I will close with some comments on why voter registration is so important and how ERIC can help. As you know from hearing the testimony today and probably from your other public hearings, voter registration is a key consideration when election administrators are planning an election. It's a critical variable in any discussion about resource allocation, and resource allocation decisions certainly impact the voter experience on Election Day. Coming from a state that had one of the closest gubernatorial elections in U.S. history, I know that public trust in the outcome in an election begins with trust in the voter registration process. The public expects voter rolls to be clean, but they also expect voter registration to be easy and convenient. And elections administrators have a duty to maintain accurate voter rolls, but this can be a real challenge for the reasons you heard earlier. We rely on a very antiquated system that's inefficient, costly, and error-prone. And as research demonstrates, we simply cannot keep up with a highly mobile society. Modernizing voter registration will help improve other aspects of elections administration that impact the voter experience. Better data sharing through programs like ERIC is a vital part of modernizing our registration system. It provides states with a powerful new set of tools that will improve the accuracy of our rolls and expand access to voter registration, achieving both goals more efficiently. So thank you for the opportunity to talk about ERIC, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
And if I can just follow up for a brief minute, one of the roles Pew will play going forward, because we don't have no role in the governance of ERIC, is we will be attempting to collect more data and research about what the effects of ERIC are long term. And just to give you some idea, the 7 states that are participating, as Shane mentioned, are using this data now for list maintenance activities. To put it in a broader context, with the 7 states, they identified, thanks to ERIC, about 800,000 individuals whose address on the voter file was not as up-to-date as the address on their motor vehicles file within the state. In other words, they had moved within the state, but even the state had not identified that. In 7 states alone, 800,000 nearly. They had identified about 100,000 people, almost 100,000, who had moved from one of the ERIC states to another of the ERIC states. That's just mobility within those 7 states that we mentioned, 100,000 voters. And then it identified about 23,000 dead people who still had records in those states on the lists. And then even ERIC identified about 14,000 duplicates that were on the lists in those 7 states. That was something the statewide voter registration databases were supposed to catch, but they don't always have all the data necessary to be able to match a record to another record. So ERIC is already demonstrating some benefits to the states that have participated, and will continue to document what those effects are. As a result of some of this research, which Shane has helped collect and disseminate, there have been several states that have approached the other ERIC states. We anticipate several more will be joining in the coming year.
Thank you very much. And now we'll proceed to questions. Commissioner Thomas, then Grayson, then McGeehan. Thank you. Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. David, I was interested in your comment about the lack of parity in terms of addresses being up to date with motor voter, in terms of more up-to-date driver's license than voter registrations. And it seems, we've just celebrated 20 years under the NVRA, and I think it's pretty clear there's an abject failure of DMVs to do what they are required to do under federal law, and that's been reflected in a lot of the data that the EAC has actually collected. I wonder if you'd have any observations on that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Looking at data that the EAC has collected from the states indicates that very few states by any measure would consider that that the NVRA is working well in those states, particularly at DMVs where you would expect to see a lot of the registrations coming from. I think the only states, two examples of states that are doing well from the data are Michigan and Delaware, where we see pretty strong numbers, around 80% plus of the overall number of voter registrations originating at DMVs, according to the EAC data. But the EAC data also demonstrates not only are there a relatively small percentage of registrations coming from DMV, which of course was one of the main points of the NVRA. One of the nice things about DMV registrations is they're not driven by the election calendar, they're driven by life events. Has a person come of age? Have they changed their name? Have they changed their address? All relevant to a driver's license transaction, also relevant to a voter registration transaction. And if you look at DMV registrations over time in the states, it's a fairly constant line, very little deviation from the peaks and the valleys. Whereas if you look at the paper registrations that come in the states, what you see is that 48-month business cycle for elections, and I know the election officials on the panel know about this, where about 47 of those months, everything's moving at a pretty slow clip, pretty manageable clip, and all of a sudden all hell breaks loose on the 48th month when all the registration transactions occur. So if you look at DMV registrations, you'd expect to see very little variation in them. And the data quality, it's pretty clear, is not good on DMV transactions. You look at a state like, for instance, Ohio, only about 14%, where we are right now, of course, only about 14% of the voter registrations come in from their Bureau of Motor Vehicles here in Ohio, compared to around 85% for Michigan right next door. California, about 1.6 million registrants came in through DMV in the 2007-2008 period of time. But for some reason, only 700,000 came in the 2011-2012 period of time. I think it's very difficult to explain, and it raises big data questions about how well motor vehicles is registering voters in a state like California, where about 1 in 10 voters in the United States resides. That's only about 14% of their overall voter registrations are coming in through DMV in California, less than 1 in 6. Another example, Florida, over 1 million people registered to vote through their DMV in 2008, under 700,000 in 2012. So you're seeing variations in the numbers that you would not expect, which raises big questions about the data quality as the states, these are self-reported numbers through the EAC. And what we've determined at Pew, we've tried to do further research on this. One thing we know is clear, it's very difficult for state motor vehicles agencies to document how well they are doing. They're not doing a very good job of it. With the exception of a few states, Michigan, Delaware, and some others, the vast majority of states are doing a remarkably poor job of being able to even document how well they're performing under the NVRA.
Commissioner Grayson?
We've got 7 states right now. I know you've been talking to a few more. What are some of the? I mean, some states are going to say, I want to get this thing started and prove it, But what are some of the other objections that you've heard? What are the common buckets that they fall into? Because this seems like a great, and especially now that it's working, it seems like just a great program.
I think we'll probably both end up answering this question, but one of the first concerns, or one of the things that states are waiting for, I think they are waiting to see how it goes with the 7 of us that are kind of blazing the trail. Some of it is cost, but costs are fixed, relatively fixed in ERIC, and the more states that join, the lower everyone's costs are. So I think some of them are also waiting, again, more states in, they know the costs will be down. And then some of them need legislation. They need authorizing legislation in their state laws to be able to share data between agencies or share data across state. Those of us that are in either got legislation to do that early on in the process, or we already had the authority in our law.
On the cost, if I could follow up, does the cost savings that you see from not having to mail ballots to dead people, I know sometimes states distribute money to localities based on how many registered voters they have, so that's a cost saving. When you wash that all out, it's still a pretty good deal.
Yes, I think it will be. So we're early enough in the process that we haven't been able to identify all of the cost savings, quantify all the cost savings.
Yeah.
But I think most of the cost savings are going to go to the locals, which is great. That's where they really need to go. But on the state side, we'll see cost savings by not subscribing to data services, and probably, hopefully, printing fewer voter registration forms, and other activities at the state level.
And I should just add, there's kind of front-end and back-end savings for the states that participate. The front-end savings are what Shane mentioned. They no longer have to each state foot the bill for all of these data services they were getting. They were using staff time and resources to do this often difficult matching between 2 data sources that was taking a lot of time and effort. And so there's front-end savings there where now all of the data that's coming out of ERIC is designed to be actionable data. It's been pre-vetted. And then the back-end savings are, as you suggest, not only are you not mailing stuff out to voters who are no longer in your jurisdiction or eligible to vote or who are dead, but you're also seeing reductions in provisional ballots and things like that that are driven by bad addresses in the voter list. And what our job at Pew is going to be is we're going to try to get good data on that to document that and publish it.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Last two questions, Commissioner McGeehan and Co-Chair Ginsburg.
I was curious if you, without getting too technical, if you could explain a little bit why ERIC has better matching criteria. For instance, how could ERIC find deceased voters that you couldn't find in your state?
Okay. So I'll start with that. The way matching works in most states is, especially the election officials on the panel know, you might have a voter list and you compare it to one other data source. And you're always limited by what fields match in that data source. So if you're looking at a Social Security death list, the addresses are usually not going to be addresses you can match. It might be an old address in the Social Security death list. They're definitely not going to have a driver's license number in there, and most of your voter files don't have a Social Security number associated with it. So all you might have between your voter list and the Social Security death list is a name and birth date match. Well, that poses a big problem because, of course, people might use a different name on their voter list. There might be errors in the voter list. I often talk about this. If you have a David Becker on one list born on January 1st, a David Becker on another list born on January 2nd, there are 4 possibilities. One is that the same person in January 1st is correct. 2, that the same person in January 2nd is correct. 3, they're the same person, and this actually happens. January 1st and January 2nd are both wrong. And 4, they're different people with very close birth dates. And no human being can tell you which of those 4 it is based on that information alone. What ERIC does is it takes multiple data sources and forms what I call a web of confidence because it's matching multiple data sources across multiple fields at once. So using driver's license numbers, Social Security numbers, birth dates, addresses, and name, it can form a web of confidence. And under ERIC's matching criteria, a name and birth date match alone would form, they have a 1 to 10 point scale of confidence. It would be around a 6, roughly. 6s never get reported to the states. All the states are seeing right now are 9s and 10s, meaning virtually every data point is matching across multiple fields and sources.
Just to follow up, does the state then get, when they're notified of a let's say a match with a 10 strength of confidence, is the state given the underlying data as to what how that match was made? Or
So each of our reports includes the confidence score, and then it includes the source of information that is used to make that score. So we're not sharing the sensitive data, and data that we submitted we get back. So there's the score, a resource where how that score was made, referencing other data sources in our data.
Shane, you had mentioned that Washington recently joined the Kansas Compact. Secretary Kobach will be with us momentarily, but could you discuss a little bit why Washington made that decision and the interaction between the 2 programs? Are they complementary?
Okay. I think they are complementary. They're certainly apples and oranges for sure. So ERIC is prospective going forward real-time data checks, or very close to real-time data checks that we can use to keep the list up to date almost every other month, depending on what cycle we're on. The Kansas Interstate Project is a look back at the last general election, and that match occurs in January. We haven't done the match yet because we will in January of 2014, looking back at this 2013 general election. So they're really different purposes. They're tools with different purposes, and so in some ways complementary. That's why we're joining, because it will help identify it. One of the things it identifies is people who may have voted in more than one jurisdiction. One of the trade-offs with joining Kansas is we know there's a lot of work on the back end when we get those reports back from Kansas. Because of the matching is not as sophisticated in the sense they don't have access to the same software we're using. We know there'll be more work on our end to make sure that those matches are really true matches before we pursue prosecution if it's a double vote, for example. So more work on the back end for states. It's a look back. ERIC is looking real time and going forward.
If I could, just a real quick follow-up on that, in terms of the amount of work that you have to do on the back end, is there can you give us some feeling for error rate or other adjustments that you have to make sure that what you receive is accurate?
And you're referring to the Kansas project?
Because you mentioned the back-end work that was required.
So in our preparations for joining Kansas, we've talked with a couple states who are in the Kansas project, and there is one state that's in both, Colorado. And from the Director of Elections Colorado's comments, we can anticipate a few weeks worth of work for one staff person to go through those reports when they get back, and that's pretty much full-time for 3 to 5 weeks. And then that's just combing through the data. And then the process of actually, if you have suspected double voters, as the elections officials here know, that can take weeks or months to work through those cases and work with law enforcement to investigate and bring those to closure.
Okay, thank you very much. This has been extremely helpful.
Thank you.
And we much appreciate it. We're now going to hear about the Kansas project from Secretary Kobach
Thank you.
by phone.
Hello,
So-
can you all hear me?
Is that the Secretary?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you very much. And if you can't hear us, let us know. We're very happy to have you. The commission appreciates very much your making the accommodation in light of the travel difficulties that you ran into. And so please proceed.
Okay, and do you have the PowerPoint up on your screen there?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. Well, I'm sorry I'm not with you in person. I got to the airport this morning only to find that my flight had been canceled by Delta, so it was the only direct flight from Kansas City today, so I'm sorry about that. But I thought we could walk through this and field your questions. Also with me is our elections director, Brad Bryant, who's been director of elections in Kansas for around 30 years, so he's got a wealth of experience in this area. But yeah, if we could maybe advance the slide to go to like the third slide that says National Voter Registration Act of 1993. You know, the NVRA, of course, informs and directs a lot of what we do as Secretaries of State and election administrators. But if you see the Section 2, which is the findings and purposes of the NVRA, subsection 4 is ensuring accurate and current voter registration rules. And some of the other purposes are more easily accomplished than others. You know, so for example, you know, getting registration out to government agencies and making registration available at government agencies is, you know, it's kind of self-explanatory how that can be done. But maintaining the voter rolls is something you're talking about right now, obviously, in your discussion of Eric, maintaining the accuracy of voter rolls. But the means to get to that end are not always crystal clear. And the interstate cross-check, the Kansas project, really started as a Midwestern project to see if it would help 4 Midwestern states, and it's really turned into, I believe, a very effective mechanism for satisfying that subpoint 4 of the purpose of the NVRA. If you go to the next slide, the next screen, the Federal Election Commissioner's Guide implementing the NVRA, there's a requirement that the states conduct a general program to protect the integrity of the process, ensuring the accurate and current voter registration roll for elections for federal office. Again, the NVRA envisioned the program, but there wasn't any such program in existence at the time. And the Kansas project or the Interstate Cross-Check project has evolved into, I think, something that can serve that role, one of several mechanisms that can serve that role, along with the National Change of Address file and the Social Security Master Death List and all of that. A little bit about the history of the cross-check. You know, it's being used by a growing number of states to basically serve 2 very focused goals. One is to identify duplicate records when a voter registers in one state and then moves to another state. And the other is to identify possible double votes, where a voter illegally casts ballots in 2 states in the same election. As you know, as part of the nationwide voter registration system, the person who moves from one state to another and registers in the new state is supposed to provide his or her address in the previous state, so the record can be canceled there. But if the person fails to provide that address, or the registrar fails to send it to the previous jurisdiction, or if the registrar in the previous jurisdiction fails to act on the cancellation notice, a duplicate record exists. And as I'm sure you already know, this problem is a big one numbering in the many, many millions of duplicate records between the states, in large part due to the very mobile society we live in, with people moving relatively frequently during their lifetimes. So the cross-check started, if you want to move to the next screen, which says 2006 Interstate Cross-Check, it started at a conference in December of 2005 when the states of Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, and Iowa signed a memorandum of agreement to see if we could coordinate efforts in various ways and also see if we could successfully check our voter registration rolls against each other and see if we could find duplicates and how this might work. And so in 2006, we had the first actual cross-check with the 4 states that you see there. Then nearby states expressed an interest in joining, hearing about this project. 2007, we did the second cross-check with 6 states. 2008, 10 states. 2009, 12 states. 2010, 13. I came into office and was elected in 2010 and learned about this program. I didn't even know about it prior to becoming Secretary of State. Learned about it and recognized that the value increases not exponentially, but in a very steep linear fashion, the more states that are involved. So I set out to recruit other states into the program and make it truly national in scope. So in 2011, we got up to 14 states. If you go to the next slide, in 2012, we were up to 15 states. If you go to the next slide, in 2013, we had 22 states. And in 2014, when we will next be doing it, right now it looks like we'll have 26 states and perhaps more. So we now have the majority of states in the country in the program. And by adding more states, that increases the ability of the participating states to find duplicate records and potential double votes. So to give you a sense of how the number of records we're talking about. So when the first 4 states did it, it was 9 million records, 9 million voter registration records that were being compared across those 4 states. If you jump forward to 2012, when we had 15 states, that was about 45 million records. Then to go ahead and take the next slide. The 2013 cross-check program, the number of records compared was almost 85 million records. And you can see, if you look at the component states, that states like Kansas, we have 1.8 million to offer to compare, but obviously bigger states like Ohio have 8 million, and these are of course reflecting the size of the voter rolls in the various states. Florida, nearly 10.5 million. And so, we can now tell duplicate where people are registered in more than one of those participating states. Now, the way it works is the states will pull the data on January 15th of each year using the prescribed data format that's been agreed on in this memorandum of agreement. If you go to the next slide, it says interstate cross-check data format. So the information should be self-explanatory. We need the name of the person, the date of birth, absolutely critical. The last 4 social, if it's available. I think I heard the tail end of the previous presentation, and that's correct. The majority of voters do not have that, but we do have them for a substantial number of voters. I think, roughly a third, give or take. And the date of registration, and then very critical, did they vote in the last election? We upload the data to a secure FTP site that's hosted by Arkansas. If you want to go to the next slide, how does it work? As soon as all the state files are uploaded, the Kansas Secretary of State IT department pulls the data, runs the comparison of the files, and uploads the results to the FTP site by early February. And then each state downloads those results from the FTP site, hosted by Arkansas, and processes the results according to their own laws and regulations. And then a critical part of all of this, in my mind, is the last bullet point there, and that is that we delete all of the data after the cross-check is run. So no other state retains custody of the voter rolls of any other state. and I think that's important for security. It's important for peace of mind of voters and elected officials. And so it's a one-time thing we do in January, and then the data is destroyed. But the states get this information illustrating when you have duplicate files. So if you go to the next slide, which I think may have some gee-whiz features to it. So you have a potential match being shown, and you, in this case, this John Q. Public is registered in Kansas and Colorado, and that's the nature of we say potential match, because obviously you don't then none of the states then just take that individual off the voter rolls in the previous state. At that point, most states will then mail an NBRA-style confirmation notice to voters who appear to have moved to another state based on the cross-check. And this requires comparing the registration dates. Obviously, the state with the older registration date mails the confirmation notices. And once the confirmation notice is mailed to the registrant, either we get a confirmation from the voter that, yes, I have moved to the other state and can be removed from the roll of the previous state, or if there is no response, then the voter can be placed on the inactive list as defined in the NBRA. And as you know, being inactive means the registrant is subject to cancellation after the second federal general election succeeding the mailing of the notice. And most states will have the actual management of their voter rolls done by their county election officials. The actual removal of the person from the voter rolls, if that ultimately happens, and the mailing of the notice is typically done at the county level. If you go to the next slide, which should be a grid, and I don't know if you can see the numbers or not based on the size of your screen there, but basically that grid shows the number of matches between each of the participating states.
Secretary, if I may interrupt you just for a second, you might want to give us an example, because it is a little bit hard for us to make out with the visual display that we have here.
Okay, yeah, let me do that. So basically on the vertical and horizontal columns, you just basically have the names of the participating states. And then the numbers you see, hopefully you'll have a hard copy you can look at more closely at some future point. But the numbers show the duplicate records between those two states. So for example, if you were to line up Kansas and Colorado, you would find that the number is about 12,000. And that's not surprising, because of all the states that Kansas compares against, we have the greatest number of duplicate records with Colorado. And so you find that neighboring states typically have a very high number of duplicates. Now, again, we're a relatively small state population-wise, so 12,000 is a big number for us. But if you compare Georgia, and you look at some of the states that Georgia has the highest number of duplicates with, if you line up the Georgia and Louisiana columns, you get 22,000. Again, neighboring states. Also, if you have a major metro area along a state line, you typically have a lot of movement of people across the state line. They buy a house first in one state, then they move to the other state. And so, for example, the St. Louis area, which sits on the Missouri-Illinois state line, you see 45,000 between Missouri and Illinois. Again, a very large number of duplicates. Cincinnati, where you guys are right now. If you look at Ohio and Kentucky, you see 57,000 duplicates. Indeed, that's, I think, the highest number of any two states comparing their records in our whole list. So metro areas on a state line or neighboring states tend to produce the highest number of duplicates. You also see a lot of duplicates with the state of Florida and the state of Arizona, because, of course, snowbirds will have a second residence, and they may register at that second residence, not canceling their registration in their first state, or they may just retire to the sunnier climes of Arizona or Florida. If you go to the next slide, which says total potential matches 5,033,000, those are the results from the 2013 cross-check. So you can see with each state, those are the number of duplicate records that were found in that state's voter rolls, comparing it against the other participating states. So in Kansas, we found 120,000, but if you look at Florida, over 500,000 duplicate records. So people registered in Florida and also registered in the other state. And again, we say potential because nothing's confirmed until we go through the procedures of the MVRA and let the two federal election cycles occur, or the voter himself confirms that he's dual registered. So to go to the next slide, it says success in Kansas. This goes to the other purpose of cross-check, and that is tracking double voting. And, obviously in the national discourse there's lots of talk about voter fraud and the extent to which it exists. But one form of illegal voting is pretty common, and it seems to be widespread across the country and across different age groups, demographic groups, and that's double voting. It seems like a lot of people realize that they're registered in two states, and they try to pull a fast one and vote in both states, whether it's someone who has a vacation home and says, hey, I think I can vote in this state too, or a student at college who realizes he or she's registered in the home state and in the college state. It just seems to happen a lot. And so what we do in Kansas is where we have evidence through the cross-check of a person voting in Kansas and in another state, we then drill down and ask the other state to provide a copy of the person's poll book signature when they signed in, or a copy of their signature on the advanced ballot application if they did it by mail. We compare the signatures, and once we are pretty confident that it is indeed the same person voting in both states, we refer the case to usually county prosecutors in Kansas. Some states refer it to their U.S. Attorney's Office. So in 2008, we referred 3 cases for prosecution. In 2010, we referred 11 cases for prosecution, and you can see those listed there. And I think this is really important just because once the word gets out to voters that, hey, did you hear, you can't get away with this anymore, and did you hear that so-and-so got prosecuted and, might have had to pay a fine, then I think it can deter this kind of illegal voting. If you go to the next slide, success in other states, Colorado. Colorado also has been taking this very seriously, and they have seen several indictments and have referred a number of cases to the FBI. So I think the cross-check program certainly serves that purpose, and I'm not quite sure how else we would be able to track that form of voting crime if we didn't have the cross-check. And it's, I think really it serves a very important role in that respect. If you go to the next slide, what does it cost to participate? Zero. So far, we've been able to do this with our IT department and with the Arkansas IT department, just doing it with our own resources and not charging any state to join, and we hope to continue that way because I think it's, as I said earlier, it's important to make it as accessible as possible to all states to join and compare their data this way. If you go to the next slide, it says, how can a state join the cross-check? It's pretty simple. The election official signs the MOU, then 2 staff members have to be assigned in each state, an election administrator and an IT person, and then there are periodic conference calls and email. The heavy lifting occurs in January where the voter registration data has to be pulled, and then we process the match of the databases, and then the participating states receive the results, and then they decide what to do with it. And as I said, most states then transmit that data to the respective counties, and they begin the process of cleaning up the voter rolls, determining if the person is indeed no longer resident in that state. If you go to the next slide, I just wanted to very briefly touch on one thing that I know one of the other topics you all are focusing on is line length, and not so much focusing on photo ID, which of course is an issue of great debate. But I did want to point out something that you may not be aware of, and that is there is an interesting synergy if a state happens to be one of the photo ID states and is also a state where electronic poll books are on the rise. And we saw this in the 2012 general election, as well as in some local elections that followed. And that is that if you happen to have the combination of photo ID, if you go to the slide there. It's just a copy of the photo ID. And then if you go on to the next slide, which is the electronic poll book equipment, you do find, at least based on the observation that I have made and others have made, and that is that it does tend to speed things up because, and we don't have long lines in Kansas generally. I mean, we receive complaints if a line gets over 30 minutes long. I think other states, may have a higher tolerance for long lines, but it's just not something that we see very often. And if you do have one of the counties in Kansas where you've got the photo ID and that county's electronic poll books, roughly half of our counties are using electronic poll books, and most of those have a scanner with them. The person walks in with the driver's license showing, which is the most common form of photo ID people use. They've already got it in their hand. They just hand it to the poll worker, and the poll worker uses the little scanner, like a grocery store scanner. And if you go to the last screen in the presentation, the person's picture pops up on the screen, the person's signature pops up on the screen, and the information necessary to assign the proper ballot to that individual also pops up on the screen. So it's very quick. And we've seen those counties in our state that have the electronic poll books really, and the scanners, just the lines moving lickety-split. And I've really been impressed watching how much faster those lines move. So it is an interesting synergy if a state has the photo ID, which of course should result in the state doing a public education campaign, reminding people to bring their photo ID to the polls, which we did in Kansas, and I'm pretty sure most of the other states are doing, that have photo ID rules. So they're already bringing the license. They already have it in hand. There's a sign up at the parking lot saying, don't forget your photo ID. And they just hand it to the poll worker. The poll worker scans it, and the transaction doesn't involve any, spelling of the person's name or flipping of pages. It tends to speed up our lines. Again, we didn't really have much of a problem with line length in the first place, but if you are looking for experiences that show fast-moving lines, we have noticed that in our counties that have the electronic poll books. That's all I had for the presentation. I commend the Commission for receiving information from so many different sources and looking for solutions to improve the election experience in the United States, and I'd be happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, and again for accommodating us after the cancellation of your flight with a phone call. I'm now going to check and see whether we have commissioners who have questions for you. Co-Chair Ginsburg.
Thanks again for joining us, Secretary, and sorry about the magic skies sort of failing you. We heard earlier, as I think you know, from the folks who run the ERIC project, and I asked them the same question to sort of compare the two and to discuss a little bit if they're compatible among states, which was basically their opinion, but I think we'd benefit from hearing yours as well about the ERIC project and how states can use both.
Sure. Your question, it's a little harder on our end to hear you, but I think your question was, can we compare ERIC and the interstate cross-check and talk a little bit about how the two compare and whether a state might want to use both?
Yes, that's the question. Thanks.
Well, I think as one of the previous panelists mentioned that I heard, they are complementary, and I think that's the right way to think of it. They do different things in the same field, but they are different programs that serve different purposes. So, certainly the interstate cross-check is more of as I understand ERIC, is more passive in the sense the state submits its data and the state gets this information back. And it's also backward-looking, so we're looking back at the past election, but it has important consequences looking forward. How quickly can you get your how well can you keep your voter rolls managed and clean and up to date? So it is it's different in that respect. It's something that I'm not sure exactly if ERIC could do this, but I think determining whether double votes have occurred might be more difficult to do with ERIC. but they both serve their purpose. And as I understand how ERIC works, a participating state can log into this system and can gain information about a voter that they might have some question as to the voter's residence or history or anything they need to know about that voter, whereas we don't maintain a database 365 days a year that the participating states can log into. Ours is just a one-time check that I think provides a lot of valuable information, but it is that one-time check. So, ours serves the purpose of identifying dual registrations and identifying them very quickly and passively. You don't have to go out and, a participating state doesn't have to go out and seek a particular voter's name or a particular community, and based on some suspicion that you have people dual registered, it's passively given to the state. So I think they are complementary, and different states. Colorado, as was mentioned, is involved in both, and states can assess how much value they can get from each, and I think for some, participating in both is the answer.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Commissioner Grayson has a question.
Hey, Chris. Looking at the map of the states that are participating, there's a big hole in the Northeast. Is there something unique about maybe their state laws or something that prevents them from participating? Over the years, this project's grown all across the country, but it hasn't penetrated anything in the Northeast. And I'm just curious if there's some common element to their lack of participation.
No, there isn't anything unique or unusual or different in the laws of the states of the Northeast. I think it reflects two things. One is that, or actually mainly one thing, and that is, the program tends to grow as neighboring states join. So, once, Kentucky is in, well then Tennessee might want to join. Once the state, we saw a lot of growth in the southern states in the last 5 years as neighboring states got involved. So the program, really hasn't yet spread into the Northeast. However, we anticipate that it will soon, perhaps even before the January 2014 cross-check. We've had inquiries and begun the process of getting Maine, Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Rhode Island involved. So I think the map may look different, but I think it just reflects the fact that, we started in the Midwest and expanded outward.
I believe the commissioners have no further questions. Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Secretary, and for joining us today by phone. And we will have this on the record and part of our deliberations. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
With the conclusion of that testimony, we will recess and resume again at 1:15. Thank you. On some tools that have been developed and would be of interest to the election administration community. We have witnesses Heather Smith with Rock the Vote, Mark Pilcharski, and Drew Davies. And so I think what we'll do, if we can, is we'll start with Heather Smith with Rock the Vote. And thank you very much for coming. And you'll be discussing an online registration tool.
Perfect. Thank you for having me and for this opportunity to present to all of you today. So my name is Heather Smith. I'm the president of Rock the Vote. And just as some quick background, Rock the Vote is a national, nonpartisan organization, and our mission is to register and engage young Americans in our democracy. In the last presidential election, Rock the Vote ran the largest nonpartisan voter engagement and voter registration operation across the country, registering more than 1 million new young voters. And not only that, but we register voters every day, as there are about 12,000 who turn 18 each day and need to be registered to vote. But as we do our work to register voters, we also work to improve and make our voting process work better for young and all Americans. We believe that right now the adoption of online voter registration by states is presenting a truly unique opportunity to both improve the election day experience and rethink how all of us together, whether you're a third-party registration agency, MVRA agency, an elections official, a foundation, or just an average citizen, to actually improve our voter system in pursuit of the shared goal of promoting the administration of elections in a manner that is both efficient and inclusive. So it's been well documented, and I won't spend a lot of time on the fact that our current paper-based voter registration process is timely, expensive, and error-prone. In particular, the interpreting of handwriting from paper forms, the costs and typos associated with data entry, the inevitable deluge of forms that comes at the registration deadline. As much as we'd like to fix that, people just procrastinate. And they come just as elections officials are at their busiest preparing for election day. And all of this is just a recipe for inaccurate voter rolls, which in turn significantly and negatively impact the election day experience. But online voter registration offers a solution. One, it improves the accuracy of voter files by eliminating user errors when they fill out their voter registration form. When they have to data enter a form, we can make it so they can't put today's date in their birthday line. We can also make it that it's typewritten so that it's double-checked and submitted to the state, so you eliminate the error from handwriting. Second, it also reduces costs for elections officials, eliminating the data entry of those forms and freeing up valuable and limited resources for those election offices. So with these accuracy and cost benefits, it's no surprise and quite promising that states across the country are moving to online registration systems. As of today, 13 states have complete online voter registration systems that allow both change of address and new registration. 6 are beginning implementation, and another handful are considering legislation. And support for online registration reaches across the aisle. These states are spread across the political spectrum. So as these online tools and systems are implemented, we at Rock the Vote believe it's critical that we learn from the early adopters and make online registration work particularly well for the elections officials and the citizens using this process. And I am honored to make a few of those recommendations here today. So at Rock the Vote, we've been developing and utilizing online voter registration tools since 1996. So this is our 17th year. They look very different now than they did in 96. But we've been working at them in an attempt to make the registration process just easier and more streamlined for these new voters. It allows us to put voter registration, a little tool online in front of voters no matter where they are, on whatever websites they're on. The way it works is this widget lives today on over 25,000 websites, and the user, the applicant, clicks on it. They stay in that website, which is their trusted messenger. It's a site they've chosen to visit, and a form kind of overlays. It asks them a bunch of questions that they'll need to register to vote. It fills out a voter registration form for them with the questions they've answered, and it emails to them a link to this PDF that they can then download to print, sign, and send. Through this kind of application form, this tool, more than 5 million voters have completed a voter registration form and mailed it to the appropriate county or state elections office. This widget we've also made free and available to anyone who wants to embed it on his or her website, blog, Facebook page, etc. And we've worked very hard over the past nearly 2 decades to get that interface really well done so that when someone starts it, they finish it, and that completion rate is as high as possible. Last year, we tried something new. We actually worked with the state elections offices in California, Nevada, and Washington to explore how to take our tools and sync them with the online voter registration systems that are being set up in those states. This way, we could go out and promote voter registration and get users to complete that form online, and then we could send the applicant's data to the state for processing. We will, through this fully electronic process, then eliminate the need for the applicant to print and mail, which, as you can imagine, finding a printer in a post office for new voters today is getting exceedingly harder. But it also eliminates the needs for an election form to rekey or redata enter that form when it shows up in their office. They're getting the data electronically. And we are very proud to say that in these 3 states, it worked. The rate at which an applicant got on the voter rolls when they started at Rock the Vote and finished with the state went from 68% when they had to print, sign, and mail to 96% when we transferred them to the state's website along with their data. This for us meant an increase of over 300,000 new voters getting on the rolls. And the applicant obviously registered entirely online, so there was 0 data entry required by the states. So based on these pilots and a bunch of research that Rock the Vote and our partners conducted in 2012 and in years prior, I'd like to make a few recommendations on how to best implement a online voter registration system as we look to take these to scale. First, the online voter registration system or interface that the users see has to be user-friendly. Otherwise, they don't get through it. Simply put, that means making sure it's mobile-friendly. Most people today are actually accessing the internet from a phone, not a computer, and it has to be mobile accessible. It means using best practices for disability access, to dynamically pull multiple languages, and just using basic user experience design. So again, when you start the form, you're most likely to finish it. Second, don't recreate the wheel. There are a number of states and a number of groups like Rock the Vote who have developed and made these user interfaces. Take them. They've been proven to work. And don't spend very spare dollars on building new tools. So the Rock the Vote tool, for example, is open source. It is free and available to any state that would like to use it. And you just have to map it to your own, map the interface to your own databases. So don't recreate the wheel. There's free, proven tools that are available. And then third, and this is the one I'm most excited about, quite frankly, use this moment to create new opportunities to make the voter registration process better for new registrants and better coordinated with third-party registration operatives. In other words, OVR, or online voter registration, and these tools, their greatest benefit will be missed if the interface or tool that a state or local election office sets up merely mimics an existing paper form. We can do so much more. The best of these new online systems, California, Washington, Nevada, have made opportunities to create an accessible and efficient system that allows third parties to actually integrate and be a part of it. And this matters for a number of reasons. Let's take a college or university, the military, community organizations and nonprofits. There are so many institutions that interact with unregistered voters and either have an interest, a mission, like Rock the Vote, or a legal obligation in some cases to offer registration to their audience. This promotion is critical. It brings new people in. But then let's streamline how those people get sent into the states to complete the voter registration process. If we do this in a very simple way, we can, in fact, make voter registration, we kind of rethink how voter registration works. The one key step that must be taken in order to make this new benefit possible is to provide what we call an API, or a application programming interface. And it's simply a mechanism that allows third-party tools to gather registration information and communicate it to the state's own systems. When you're registering for a class or updating an address for a student ID card at a college, the university in that student portal can ask the students if they'd like to register to vote. If the student says yes, they're asked for a few more questions about information they need. That data is then sent as a batch to the state's system through this API. They're registered to vote. You can implement this through MVRA agencies. You can implement this through Rock the Vote.
If we could ask you to sum up, and then we'll cover the rest of the points.
Absolutely. So these technologies are simple and actually inexpensive, but they could lead to the increased use of online registration by potential voters through promotional efforts by outside partners, but it also eliminates the paper forms that these organizations would otherwise submit. So these are concepts: simple user interface, ensuring that we're not recreating the wheel, and then finding ways to connect with third-party registrars, whether they be agencies, universities, military, nonprofits. And Rock the Vote has prepared a detailed white paper both on these kind of concepts, but the technical specs behind it that for best practices that include everything from available tools, sample code for the APIs, to as well as white-labeled versions of the tools that we actually use that can be taken at no cost by states, and we'll be providing that and making that available to the Commission. But in sum, just thank you for this opportunity. We're really excited about rethinking registration with the implementation of online voter registration, and share your enthusiasm for making sure it's done well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll then Drew Davies to talk about the Anywhere ballot.
Should be a slide coming up. Or is it up to yours? I think they want Mark's next on the list.
But then we'll go to Mark Polcharski, and he'll talk. Excuse me one second. So, Mark, you're set up at the moment? Is that what I'm... Pardon me?
Yes.
Okay, so actually, let me introduce Mark Polcharski, and he is going to be talking about a resource allocation tool that he devised, and please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me to speak and participate in this. It's a very interesting project. By way of introduction, my name is Mark Polcharski. I've spent many of the previous years as a professor of computer science at a college near Chicago till recently. Prior to that, way back in ancient times, I was in 1980. I was one of the first. I started and was president of one of the first software publishing companies back in the days of the Apple II and the early Macs and stuff like that. But the reason you've got me here is because last year I spent a year working at the president's re-election headquarters, and I ran a small tech problem-solving group that worked with different departments throughout the campaign. And one of the issues that came to us was one of our groups was looking to kind of get a handle on the wait time issues and where they might expect problems, where things might develop, and to have something that they could take around and talk to election officials to maybe address the problems or help them out with resource allocation. So they had a previous application running off a spreadsheet, which is some mathematical calculations. But we did a lot of research. This is all built on other people's research and data. A lot of these resources have been quoted before. Doug Spencer and Zach Markowitz from UC Berkeley, Ted Allen at Ohio State, Yuri Yang from University of Cincinnati here, Bill and Arthur Edelstein with their research, and several other projects. Anyway, and plus some data we collected on our own at the Wisconsin recall election. So what we've got here on the screen is this app that we put together. It runs in a web browser, so it's portable, will work anywhere. And you've got the option of loading it up with some data, so you don't have to do so, but for demonstration purposes, I've got Hamilton County, Ohio loaded in here, and all the precincts. And I've just randomly chosen one that it's got some potential wait times based on some voodoo, I guess. Here, let me zoom in a little bit here so you can see a little bit more of what's going on. There are three critical pieces of data in here that we can't really tell you what these are going to be. Expected voters, we loaded this up. I think these are numbers that were based on 2008 turnout on election day, 2008 turnout minus the absentee and early vote, adjusted for population change, and I'm not even sure if it was countywide or statewide. And then down here, two pieces of critical information that, again, are going to vary greatly from county to county, is how long does it take to check in? Average amount of time to check in, and then how long does it take to vote? And this issue right here has come up before the commission several times, that it's the length of the ballot can greatly affect this time, from anywhere from 3 minutes to over 10 minutes per person. So, you know, the results you're going to see here are based on just conjecture on a ballot, perhaps, but this can all be adjusted. You know, here, add a little more time to vote, and let's see, let me take away voting station temporarily, and I'm going to give you an idea what we're looking at here. So this graph, you cannot see the labels down below unless I zoom in, but this is 7 a.m. Through 8 p.m., so these are the times across the day, and then on the left side, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 60 minutes. So I've set up a scenario right here where it's showing that around 6 or 7 p.m., we've got about an hour wait. The yellow is the wait time for check-in. So these people are going to wait about 20 minutes for check-in and about another 40 minutes to vote at a voting station. And you can play around with these and adjust, you know, okay, add another voting station, and oh, that went away. We still have a check-in wait. Add another check-in station, and boom, you're, well, got a little line of voting stations now. All these pieces of data can be modified and played with to kind of give you an idea of what's going to happen. A little note on the colors here. I used yellow and violet here. Originally, I tried to be very patriotic about it, and with a white background, I used red and blue until the first person walked by and said, "Ooh, is that the wait time for the Republicans and the Democrats?" No, wait. So you might decide to go with neutral colors there, I suppose. Some of the settings in here, it's running a simulation on arrivals at a polling place based on pretty good data on arrival time. That's probably the best data we had is what times of day do people arrive at the polls. The Doug Spencer research I quoted, he had a lot of data from California where they had grad students out measuring time. We measured some arrival times at the recall election in Wisconsin. There were several other sources we got that from. And you can choose a pattern here, but let me show you. If you click on one of these, show arrival pattern, it shows what arrival we're using here. So this is showing, you know, a peak in the morning. This is the most typical, early morning peak, a little bit of a bump in the afternoon, and then your big rush later in the day. You can say, well, no, I've got a mid-morning peak instead, and or you know, you adjust it based on what you may know about a specific precinct. It's running the simulation here. Again, I better zoom in a little bit so you can see. 20 times it's simulating 20 polling days with the same data. If you say, okay, let's do it once and show me what you actually used. You can see that each time I run it here, the green line, that's the arrivals that it's actually using, which that more closely tracks what you're going to see if you're sitting there at a polling station measuring when people show up. So we gathered, you know, from 40 or 50 polling places that kind of data, and then worked out the average of arrivals there. But each time you run this, you're going to see a little bit of a skew and different wait times. If you look at the bottom there, you know, your wait times are varying. But if you run it, you know, I had it defaulting to 20 times to run the simulation, you're going to get an approximations closer to the average. Now the other lines you see here, let me make some weight so you can see a little bit better here. Do that. We're running low on time now. Okay. this also shows you the longest and the shortest wait time of those simulations. So this is the average it's showing you in the graph, but you can also see the range of expectations. So, you know, you may have a polling place set up perfectly that it's going to show no wait time, but you can't control for a busload of people showing up all at the same time, or just, you know, 10 people all showing up at 5:05, and, you know, some of them are going to have to wait. So, you know, these are the kind of variations you see. So you can play with that and get an idea of the range of results. The last thing I'll close with here is if you do load up data into it, you can also go for the entire county or the entire group set of data and fill in what your resource allocation is. In this case, this is conjecture for, you know, Hamilton County, and you can run it on the entire data set. And it takes a little bit longer because you're running how many precincts here, but it'll click up in a second here. There we go. And if you click on a column heading here, you know, the setup that I've got here is showing that, you know, these precincts are potential issues with longer wait times, where the ones down at the bottom here are in better shape. And this data can be saved, and you can, you know, work through this with the, you know, entire county's data and mess around with resource allocation based on, you know, what you know about potential turnout, et cetera. So I'll wrap with that and pass the baton.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, and we'll come back to you with questions. Mr. Davies.
I'm going to let him get a slide up here.
There you go.
That's the last one. One second for me. Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to address you today. My name is Drew Davies. I'm the owner of Oxide Design Co. and the National Design Director for AIGA Design for Democracy. I believe deeply in the right of every American citizen to clearly and easily cast their ballot as they intend. To that end, I've been working for the last 7 years on the usability and design of ballots in the voting process. Much of that work is culminated in what we now call the Anywhere ballot. The ultimate question regarding accessible elections is, what if anyone could vote on any device, anywhere, at any time? The Anywhere ballot is our answer to that question. It's a digital ballot marking interface. It's responsive, accessible, and open source. Anywhere ballot is a ballot template using current web standards that voters can use to mark a ballot on their own electronic device using their own familiar or assistive technology. A voting system using the Anywhere ballot template would present a voter with a ballot on their own device when and where they choose, up to the close of polling on Election Day. My comments today will outline the research and development of the Anywhere ballot, which are rooted in improving the information design and usability of ballots, and I'll complete my testimony by outlining how the Anywhere ballot can be implemented. By starting with the most challenging situations and working towards the center, we've already improved ballot usability across many audience groups by optimizing and clarifying ballot design and implementing plain language standards. Future usability testing with additional groups will allow us to address an even broader range of accessibility needs. Our work on paper ballots lays the foundation for building an Anywhere ballot interface that's the most clear, usable ballot solution for all voters. The Anywhere ballot is unique and effective because of our development method, combining research, best practices design, and extensive usability testing. Key team members were involved in seminal ballot design projects over the last 10 years that helped us identify what it's like for people to actually use ballots. Our project team also included researchers with experience designing online information and interactions. In combination, the key team members have worked on hundreds of printed forms and digital interfaces with a huge range of user groups, which gave us a great head start designing the Anywhere ballot. We drafted our first ballot prototype based on insights from earlier research. Of particular importance to our work were two reports. The first was AIGA Design for Democracy's report to the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, Effective Designs for the Administration of Federal Elections, published in 2007. The second, Language of Instructions on Ballots, was published by the National Institute of Standards and Technology in 2008. We employed rapid iterative usability testing to measure the accuracy and performance of our ballot prototypes. In a usability test, the design team observes while a user interacts with a prototype without training or helping the user. Our design team incorporated design changes at the end of each session in response to observations during that session. Those new design changes were then tested during the next session. Iterative testing of our ballot prototypes revealed flaws in the design that we could modify immediately. The usability testing participants, some of whom have low literacy, some of whom have cognitive issues, helped us unlock many of the challenging puzzles of creating a digital ballot. 33 sessions with real people revealed moments of discovery that clarified language and interaction. Based on this testing, we discovered that the Anywhere ballot is a meaningful tool for voters with high and low literacy and voters with mild cognitive issues. Our team also focused on incorporating the concept of plain interaction. That is, paring the ballot design down to only the essential fewest steps necessary to complete the action of voting. Plain interaction allows maximal focus on the voter's immediate interaction with the ballot. Much of this design project was about taking things away rather than adding them in order to make the ballot easier to use. Our focus on designing plain interaction means that it's much easier for voters to infer what to do from how the design looks and behaves. In other words, it's completely intuitive. When we were able to pare the language, interaction, and steps down to the essentials, voters were effective and efficient in marking their ballots. They were satisfied that they had voted the way they intended. The Anywhere ballot is important because it defines a single best practices ballot interface on which everyone can vote. We envision a time when all voters can use the same voting system when they get to the polling place, no matter the location, or even vote remotely. Currently, election officials and poll workers are trained on at least 2 different systems. People with disabilities who make it to polling places are segregated, voting on a different voting system than the people who don't identify as disabled. Voters living abroad or stationed overseas are often voting on another completely different system or not able to vote at all. We believe there will be a time soon when using a ballot like the Anywhere ballot on touchscreen technology that's readily available and relatively inexpensive will make it possible for almost anyone to vote easily, privately, and independently on the very same system. From a usability standpoint, Anywhere ballot establishes a best practices visual language for digital ballot design and presents an exemplar of plain interaction design. It proposes important interaction conventions to prevent voters from making mistakes and refines what's known about plain language for instructions on ballots. Perhaps most importantly, the Anywhere ballot is uniquely poised for implementation in real-world elections. The Anywhere ballot doesn't replace any current systems. It's a ballot marking interface, not an election management system. Consequently, it could be implemented within the context of many existing systems. This interface is one piece in the development of new options that are taking a different approach to what voting system means. It could and should be the interface for all of those systems. One reason it took so long for the best practice optical scan ballot designs to gain ground was that none of the voting systems actually supported the recommended guidelines. To implement the Anywhere ballot, we need a voting system that supports best practice digital ballot design. Accessible ballot marking devices and UOCAVA blank ballot delivery systems offer perfect test beds for jurisdictions to try the Anywhere ballot. Newer commercial systems and systems being designed in places like Los Angeles and Travis counties, we hope, will be the next step for implementation of Anywhere ballot. The Anywhere ballot was funded by the Accessible Voting Technology Initiative of ITF through a grant from the EAC. The entire template's under a Creative Commons license, and we can easily make the CSS and HTML accessible to anyone who'd like to use it. We've also developed a pattern library that describes all of the major elements of the design. My team would be delighted to partner with vendors and jurisdictions to implement Anywhere ballot, to work in real jurisdictions under real election laws and pilot it with real voters in real elections. And finally, anyone can try out the Anywhere ballot prototype on any device with a browser right now at anywhereballot.com. Thank you again to all the commissioners for your time and consideration today. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And now what we'll do is see whether we have questions here on the commission. Commissioner Patrick.
Thank you. My question is for For Mr. Poe, I'm going to mispronounce it. I'm very sorry. I thought I had it, and then there was just no way, so my apologies.
First thing I tell my students is just call me Mark.
Okay, I will certainly do that. And because I have just butchered your name, I did want to tell you that when I first received this, I played on it all day long. And one of the things that I thought was so impactful, which it would be great if you could speak to it just momentarily, or even if we could have a demonstration of it, because it struck me that when you did set up a situation or identify a scenario where there would be lines, so whether it's because of a long ballot, if you add 2 minutes more in the amount of time it takes to vote that ballot, so you have a couple extra propositions or some additional local races being added to the ballot, how dramatic that impact was, but how you could mitigate it by adding one more voting station or, doing some other thing. So it was a very powerful tool to be able to first identify on the front end how important and how impactful those things are, and then how you could potentially help to mitigate that. Now, that's all in the caveat that the local administrator, one, has such knowledge, and two, has resources to say, you know what, I still have all sorts of voting equipment. I'll make sure I put one more there, or more booths there, that sort of thing. But I just thought it was a wonderful tool.
Well, thank you.
Further question? Commissioner Lomax.
Also for Mark. Did you have a chance after the election to go back and look at some of these counties that had 4 and 5 hour lines and see how accurate you would have been predicting it?
Not as much time as I would have liked, since after the election, headquarters wound down pretty quickly, a couple of days. I did have a lot of anecdotal response. Some of the one of the counties with vote centers, I won't say where, but we had run this and identified potential vote centers that would have wait times, and that indeed happened. We used some GIS technology to predict, where people would most likely vote if they were voting closest to home. We also had at least 1 or 2 places where they used this to solve problems on election day, where wait time had gotten to about an hour and a half in one college location, and they, quickly, our person who was down there observing, ran it with the current scenario, what they had set up and what we were projecting for turnout there, and sure enough, it said you're going to have hour and a half waits, and they played around with check-in stations and voting stations, found out that if they added one check-in station, wait time should go down to 10 minutes, and it did. So that was encouraging to hear. But I don't have a lot of follow-up data. I've spoken to some people in the last 2 days that we're going to, look at, some of the things that actually happened and try to refine this. I don't have. I did not name check Charles Stewart. I will now. I didn't have access to his trove of data, so I'd like to take a look at some of that and work with the commission on some of the other data you're collecting and try to refine this further, if possible.
Thank you.
Professor Persley.
Can I just ask, following up on that, just to think about how, if the institution of early voting affects how you might make this more complicated, and by that I mean because this is basically a one-day calculator, right?
Right.
And so just to think about as jurisdictions extend and contract the number of days that there might be for voting, whether there's some other variation on this that they might want to think about.
One of the rival scenarios we had was, a flat line, pretty much steady throughout the day, Saturday type thing. We were using it for some of the early voting centers, trying to predict what turnout would be. The thing is, we didn't have much data as far as what to expect day by day early vote. There was a little bit, but not enough to be real solid at that point. There was some side research into the impact of early voting, and we found that like those 10 days before the election were the most important and the weekends were very important. The weekend voting really can mitigate some of that that late in the day bump quite a bit. So I know that question has come up before the commission prior. So.
Commissioner Grayson.
Heather, you were talking about the role that APIs play in this, and we're seeing more and more states doing online registration. How many of those are building in APIs that are, I guess, more public-facing in some respect, where somebody like Rock the Vote could have some access or some other group? And are there states that are doing a better job with that, or are they open to this? I'm just because it's great that we have this momentum on online registration, but it'd be even greater, as you said, if we could have an API that could allow tools like this to make it even more effective.
Yeah, it really would be. And I, as somebody who runs the largest third-party voter registration organization, it's a funny thing to say, but my interest lines up perfectly with those running elections, which is I don't want my volunteers carrying around a bunch of forms and having that liability and who knows how, and it's a lot of work to, So if we could start the process and have that just sent electronically over to the states for the state to finish it, gosh, wouldn't that be better and better for everyone? So I really think it's a win-win for everyone involved, which so we've had very little opposition to it. It's just that we just started. So.
Is there a standard API format that you've been pushing or that has been shown to be more effective?
I will tell you, so in the first 3 states that tried it, they already had systems set up, and last year they saw the value and tried it. Washington, California, and Nevada, they all did it differently.
Okay.
And what they did was, I'll give you the general idea. So they started, and in fact, anyone can go, if you have your phone, you can go to rockthevote.com, click register, and then pick Washington. Don't put in your email. That's just there because if you input one piece of data, you're most likely to finish it. And then you'll see how it works with Washington. You could do that right now. But what it did was we started there, and then once we got a little bit in, because we said, great, do you have a driver's license in Washington? And if you do, they click yes, and we said, would you like to finish with the state online, or would you like to stay here and print your form? And, of course, everyone says finish online. Mm-hmm. And what we did was then we just sent them and their data to the state's website. It worked, and we did that in 3 different ways with different amounts of data being sent. Sometimes it was in an iframe. Sometimes they went to the website in a new window. So lots of different little detailed things. And from that, we learned that, 1, the longer they stay on our site, the more likely they are to finish it. 2, a lot of the state sites aren't actually mobile friendly, don't have the language capacity, like we're in 10 languages, most don't have some of the disability things in place. So just for the user experience, it's better if they stayed with us longer. And then, if we could pull it into an iframe so it kept a common experience. So we just looked at all those things, and the highest completion rates were if there was a complete API. So they just stay with us entirely. Yeah. That also allows an agency to use it or a university. Right. The next was when you just fill out as much as possible with us and send them over.
And you just kind of pre-populate the fields
pre-populate, review, hit submit with the state. So actually it is our recommendation that states provide both, because there are places like the DMV, for example, isn't going to remake their entry form to add the 3 additional questions. So just let them send what they have and the user to the Secretary of State's website, pre-populate as much as possible, finish it there, review, hit submit. Groups like us or, Facebook, like anyone who wants to can build their own interface and an experience that works for their own users and send it electronically as a batch. That's better for us. So those 2 systems or those 2 kind of technical solutions are super simple to implement. They don't cost a lot of money. They'll save a ton. And so the first state to implement the full API will be Virginia. They're building it right now. Okay. California is redoing their system, so cover 2. In May, you'll see a much better that process that actually implements that second piece where we get a person 90% through. We send them to the state where it's all pre-populated. They'll review and hit submit on the state site. and we continue to kind of build on these models. But we've seen those two systems work. They kind of accommodate everyone, the API and then the one web page to land if you send it to the state. We have API code that we've worked out with Virginia that we're testing right now but should be finalized soon that the state will build. We have code for the tools that get people through it that are very simple. You can either use ours, which you can just go to rockthevote.com/partner and take it for free right now, or you can just take the code and map it to your own server and put it on your own website. And so the tools exist, and the code that worked best in these 2012 tests, we're in the process of finalizing, and we'll be making that publicly available for sure.
Thanks.
Does that help?
That was perfect.
Okay,
Thanks.
great. Sometimes it gets a little technical. But
Maybe not was perfect for me. Maybe not for some of those.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Commissioner Thomas.
Heather, when you have them printed out and mail it, are you putting a QR form or barcode on those so that clerks could scan it and get the data that way and not have to retype?
Yeah, it's a great question. We've done two things that are both, one is we have a barcode, so when the user prints it, signs it, puts it in the mail, we then know when that's a USPS barcode. It has a name, I can't remember, but that way when it goes through the mail, we're able to we can track that. That way we follow up with anyone who printed it but didn't mail it in. And so we call that our chase, but we spend a ton of time and money following up with those voters. So there's that USPS code on the outside. Because when they print, it prints with the address to mail it to, so they just fold it over, stick it in the mail. The second thing is, right now it doesn't have a barcode for the elections offices, the counties to scan, but that technology is built in. It's just not turned on. And it's not turned on because no one was using it. But it's very easy for us to turn back on. And the one county that we worked with on developing it was LA County, so Dean Logan there. Because we've sent about 250,000 forms to their office every presidential cycle. So he was very eager to not have to rekey something that was already data entered. So they had to work with their system, with the DIM system that they use to allow it to basically, with like a scanner, to scan the code, pull the data down from, we set up a pair database where it doesn't have the personal ID information, but it has all the other stuff that they could then pull from. They would just enter because we destroy the personal information, we don't want to keep it. They just enter that and then can hit submit. So that does exist for the data pull, and it's easy to turn on or off.